Hi, everybody. Jennifer Schaus coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. And thank you for joining us in our sponsored content webinar. Nick Bernardo is president of MyGovWatch, a leading bid notification portal. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So MyGovWatch is a leading bid notification portal serving more than 200 industries with a focus on customer service and overall value. The site offers more leads than free government subsidized sites at a fraction of the cost of overpriced legacy paid platforms. Nick has overseen the growth of the portal since it began serving all industries in 2018, including the deployment of next generation artificial intelligence and alternative classification systems to make sure users hear about right leads. Nick also has overseen the development of Open Recs Access, the portal's easy way to find out who's winning and losing bids after they close, to include copies of contracts, winning proposals, bidder pricing, and other information that's not often easy to access. His career includes broad-based experiences in business-to-business marketing, information professional services marketing, direct sales, social media and event marketing, nonprofit fundraising, all with an emphasis on small business development and government procurement at all levels. He lives in Philadelphia area with his wife and 3 children, enjoys travel, takes golf way too seriously for his skill level. Okay, Nick, I'm gonna make myself muted here, and I'm ready for your next slide whenever you are.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, thank you again for giving us this opportunity. And thanks for everyone for joining us. I guess if you're on the East Coast like me, it's getting to be lunchtime. I think we're going to keep it to a half hour. And if you're also on the East Coast like me, you're just really happy to see a little bit of blue sky this morning, depending on how far south you are. So I'm excited. Try to keep this not so nerdy, although I keep calling it sort of a nerdy topic. We're going to try to make it interesting, and I think some of this stuff is really going to be a lot of fun to talk about. If you're signing up for a webinar about NAICS codes, you're really serious about government contracting, and you may just want to learn a little bit about the topic. So I guess, Jennifer, we can start with the next slide. We're going to talk about NAICS at a glance. And so NAICS at a glance, depending on how old you are on this webinar, there might be some folks out here maybe who do not start at the beginning, the very beginning, when SIC, or the Standard Industry Classification System, was launched in the 1930s. But certainly most of us on this webinar, many of us, might remember when NAICS was first established in 1997 by the Census Bureau, which still maintains it. So some of us may also remember in 2000 when NAICS was adopted for size standards in lieu of SIC. And then fast forward another dozen years, Sam.gov enters the scene, and it replaced the CCR. And I'm sure there are some of us on this webinar, and Jennifer would know this. What does the acronym CCR mean? Well, the Central Contractor Registry. So the CCR used to be where people would have to have their data points about their company, and that became Sam.gov in 2012. 2021, beta.sam.gov came on the scene, and it replaced FedBizOps, which I always thought worked extremely well. But they came along and said, you know what, we should have all of the data about contractors in the same system as all of the data about the contracting opportunities. So that's what they did a couple years ago. It's important to know that NAICS is just a taxonomy, the North American Industry Classification System. It's just a taxonomy, and it's an arbitrary system, not unlike some of the other systems out there. So on SAM.gov, you're going to see the Product Service Code. That's another federal taxonomy that also gets appended to every opportunity. The NIGP, the National Institute of Government Purchasing, is another. And then recently, in the last few years, I've seen the UN SPSC, the United Nations Standard Products and Services Code. Also, MyGovWatch has 24 top-level categories. So the analogy would be the table shows 20 top-level sectors. And so if we advance, it's important to know that NAICS, it's important to know that NAICS exists independently of federal purchasing, meaning it's useful in federal purchasing, but it doesn't solely exist to support federal purchasing. So the NAICS structure, we have 2-digit top-level codes, and those would be the sectors. and the table on the left shows you sort of the breakout. I've color coded that. You have 6-digit bottom level codes, and there are over 1,000 6-digit codes. So on the right, just arbitrarily picked out, the structure for lawyers and accountants. You can see how the black coloring for the sector goes down to purple for the subsector, then red for the groups, legal services, for example, and then blue, the industry, offices of lawyers. And then you finally see the 6-digit under legal. You have offices of lawyers, title, abstract, and settlement offices, and all other legal services. So that's the basic structure of NAICS and how it goes from 2 digits to 6 digits. And we can continue if we proceed with the slides. So NAICS in federal contracting. So there's 2 sides of it, folks. There's the buyer side and there's the seller side. And I take it most of you are on the seller side. There may be some government folks on the line with us. I know there's some Apex people with us. On the buying side, the CFR governs how NAICS is applied to federal contracts. So you have 48 CFR and 19102B1. Contracting officers shall assign 1 NAICS code. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can see that they're required to put a single NAICS code on every procurement, one that best describes the principal purpose of the supply or service being acquired. And we're going to talk a little bit about that before we're done in this half hour, because that idea is something that is a little bit challenging in terms of the way that businesses go about their business and how they market their products and services. There's not many people on this webinar, I'm sure, who only do precisely one thing, although some of you may be with us. On the selling side, you're required to list 1 or more NAICS codes on your SAM profile, specifying which is your principal NAICS. And we can continue with the next slide. So now we get to Sam.gov NAICS. We saw, when in preparing the presentation, we saw that as of Wednesday, there were just under 100,000 open opportunities on Sam.gov. So 99,000 and change. And that's as of Wednesday. And for the purposes of that number, we excluded sales of properties. So we just took out, things that the government is selling and focused only on what they're buying. And so the question is, what is the government buying, right? Before we get into NAICS or go further with NAICS, and who is on this webinar, and how do those 2 data points relate to one another? So I think if you looked on different days, you would get different pie charts, but on the day we looked, and this is one day of data, the pie chart on the left, it looks like the federal government disproportionately buys products versus services. So on the day we looked, it was about 3/4 products and 1/3, or I'm sorry, 1/4 services, a little bit over 1/4. But with 100,000 items, that still means, depending on how much fluctuation from day to day, there could be anywhere from 25,000 service solicitations out there or opportunities, or maybe upwards of 30 or 40,000, again, depending on the day that you looked at it. Who was on this webinar? We actually looked at who signed up, and we looked into each one of your companies, at least where we could. We looked at your websites, and it looks like the people on this webinar are disproportionately in the services industry. So there are some product folks on the line with us now, but lots of people selling services. And it's sort of a sign of the times in the economy today. You just need people to do things, and the federal government is included in that. It's not as hard for them to find product providers, but everyone's trying to find people to do a myriad of different things, and the federal government is no exception. So with the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit, or just an intro to, why did we do the study that we did? And all of this on today's webinar, if we advance, Jennifer, goes back to an article that I wrote earlier in the year, where we looked at a sample of things on Sam.gov. And Jennifer, I'm not seeing the slide advancing. If you could advance that.
Sorry, it looks like we've got a question here on slide 5.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead. Why don't we take a question? Yes.
Yep. So what type of person or company should go to sam.gov to look for solicitations and opportunities, and who should pay a commercial service to help with this?
Fantastic question. And this is something that comes up from time to time for folks who are signing up for our website. So think of it this way. If you only want to do business with the federal government and you have an extremely narrow focus in what you're selling, then you probably don't need a commercial service. If you have time every morning to look up something that's extremely narrow in focus, then just go to Sam.gov. Once you cross over into having many things or more than just a few things that the federal government might be buying from you, or certainly if you have an interest in selling to state and local government, then you want to use a commercial service like MyGovWatch. So we're tracking SLED contracts nationally, anything from the federal government all the way down to tiny towns and tiny school districts, for example. So I would say the folks who should be just going to SAM are folks that are selling one very specific thing only to the federal government. But thanks for that question. And thank you for stopping me there, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And folks, we do like questions during this format. I think it just helps make it a little bit more conversational. So the data study that we did, we looked at under 1,000 SAM titles. And what we did was we categorized each one. We categorized it either as a product or a service. And then we looked at whether or not we felt that the correct NAICS was applied. And by doing that, we actually had to look at the scope of work if it was a service and make that determination. And we also determined whether or not we felt one NAICS was appropriate, especially if it's a service. So the reason why we did this at MyGovWatch, and those are not staff members, but this is in the category of how like esoteric and a little nerdy this all is. We felt that it would be really interesting if we could put this information out there, not only to promote our business, but to study how we can even further improve the way that we are pushing leads to people and we can advance. So the findings, we found that a large percentage of solicitations have an incorrect NAICS assignment. Now, the good news is they get it correct more often than they get it incorrect. So for the data set that we looked at, again, under 1,000 SAM opportunities, 62% of the time they got it right, but 38% of the time we felt they got it wrong. And that runs the gamut of things that were extremely wrong or things that were reasonable, but just somebody could interpret it a little bit differently, or things that might be subject to challenge. But the good news is they get it correct more often than not, but that still means that there are potentially thousands of things that are on Sam.gov today that are not correct. And then with the next slide, we looked at product versus service opportunities. So it turns out that federal buyers are more likely to get product NAICS assignments correct than they are to get service NAICS assignments correct. So with products, at least the data set we looked at, and I should point out, if you looked at a different data set, you might come to slightly different conclusions, but we think the point would remain the same. For the products that we looked at, they were about 71% of the time correct in the NAICS code that they chose, and about 29% of the time not correct. But for services, they were much less likely to get something correct or something that was really spot on. Again, this gray area where it might be marginally okay, but easily subject to challenge. So they got about 49% of our sample correct and 51% incorrect, and we can advance. So we're going to look at a half dozen examples over the next 15 minutes. The first thing we're going to look at is a pretty egregious error. And I don't know if you're movie fans out there, this is a movie from the 1990s, Shawshank Redemption. This is the famous scene when Andy Dufresne plays Mozart to all the prisoners in the yard. And so this is an opportunity, and it's on Sam.gov. Anything that I show you in the next 15 minutes for the remainder of this webinar, you can look up yourself. There's an RFP out there, or a solicitation, called Fiscal Year 23 Passover Meals. And don't you know that someone actually picked other animal food manufacturing as the NAICS code? So that to me is pretty egregious and inexcusable. I was thinking about this, if someone were to make a mistake like that in the private sector, might lose their job. I'm not sure that's happening in the federal government, but that's just a really good example. And I will say, I'll qualify this by saying, that's really at the far end of the spectrum. I mean, at the end of the day, federal procurement people are trying to do the right thing. In this case, I just wanted to show one that was clearly just completely ridiculous and totally inappropriate, but it's one example. The correct NAICS for this one would be 722310, food service contractors institutional. And we can advance to the next example. Now, this one is very interesting because this sort of gets to the crux of what I think most of the incorrect NAICS code assignments are, where the procurement person has the best intentions, but it's just not correct. And so we're going to talk about this damn goat grazing solicitation for a few minutes. So the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, they wanted to hire someone to do some damn goat grazing. And so what they did is they put out this solicitation, lower monumental dam goat grazing. So in our town, we have a small wooded area about a mile away, and they fence it off once a year and they bring goats in. And the sole purpose is to have the goats clear the brush in this wooded area that becomes overgrown every spring. And this is exactly what the Army Corps of Engineers was looking to do around a dam. So there's a concept in the regs that talks about what must happen when there is a supply versus a service. And so CFR 121-402B2 says acquisitions for supplies must be classified under the appropriate manufacturing or supply NAICS code, not under a wholesale trade or retail trade NAICS code. So in this case, think about it. Is the federal government buying goats here? No, they're not buying goats. But the procurement person is probably thinking, well, I'm supposed to default to the manufacturer. Well, who manufactures goats? Farmers. So in this case, the person I think was probably looking at the regs a little bit too strictly and didn't realize that, you know what, this is not really about buying goats. The product service code on SAM for this item was listed as lease or rental of equipment, live animals. Now we're getting closer. But even still, if you look at the SOW for this opportunity, they're not renting goats. What they're doing is they're hiring a contractor to bring goats to the dam and eat the underbrush. That's it. So clearly, the correct NAICS code in this case would not be goat farming, and it would not be renting goats. It would be a service provider, landscaping services. So 561730 in this case. And we can go to the third example.
Sure, Nick, we've got another question here that I'm going to read off.
Sure.
So folks, if you have any question, folks, please type in your question on the right-hand side. You should have a gray panel and a drop-down that says questions. I'm not going to read off your name, so they're all anonymous, so don't be shy. But the question reads, what should bidders do to make sure they capture incorrectly labeled solicitations? Are there additional codes such as PSCs that can help? And PSCs, for those that don't know, product service codes.
Yes. So and you might, if you, as I'm answering this, you can feel free to clarify or ask follow-up questions, but every SAM item contains not only a NAICS code, but also a product service code. So the SAM site, if you happen to be the user type who only needs to go to SAM, if you're only selling one thing, on SAM, you can put in a NAICS code. You can also put in a product service code. So there are certainly cases, and we actually looked at this in the data set. Pardon me. There are cases where the procurement person will get the NAICS code wrong and then get the product service code much closer or correct and spot on. There are other cases where they get both of them correct, and there are other cases still where they might get both incorrect. So if I'm answering your question, hopefully I am, I would say that you should be searching not only by NAICS and PSC, but all of the keywords on Sam.gov that could be remotely associated with what you're selling. Does that help?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So the third example, I'm putting in the category, or I'm calling this a marginally correct NAICS assignment. And so there's a solicitation out there earlier this year, and it's simply called traffic management. And when you look at the scope of work for this opportunity, there's some event, I forget where it is, but it might be on a military base. And what they're looking for, they're just looking for people to tell you where to park your car. We've all been to festivals and fairs where they have people parking in various places, and they have people sort of directing you on where to put your car if there's just a lot more cars on site than they would normally have. And that's exactly what they're looking for. And so what they applied to that solicitation was 561320, temporary help services. And that is a fairly generic NAICS code. And that's the problem, I think, sometimes with the NAICS code. And that's sort of one of the problems that our system overcomes. There are many products and services where there are catch-all NAICS codes, right? Where they're not quite sure how to classify it. So they find something that might be an umbrella for lots of different things, and they just assign it that NAICS code. So there's effort there and there's good faith, but it doesn't always work out. So in this case, temporary help services, when you go look at that NAICS code, it doesn't really talk about anything like this. It's more like construction, people in office environments doing office type things. But then when you start really studying different NAICS codes, you find out that 561990, all other support services, actually includes flagging, which is exactly this, flagging and directing traffic. So this is one that's sort of marginally correct because you could make a case that this is the correct NAICS code, but someone could easily challenge this if they felt that it was in their best interest to do so. So no one ever said this was easy, and I'm certainly not saying, and I hope you're not getting this, that the procurement folks in the federal government are not trying to get it right. I think in most cases, they're trying in good faith to do it correctly, and sort of we're getting, a little bit closer to correct here, where at least they applied something that seems remotely plausible or close to what it should be, just not quite right. And so we can advance.
Great, and I've got 3 questions that just came in here. I'll read them in the order they were typed in. The first is, are PSCs, product service codes, more likely to be correct than NAICS codes?
That's a great question. We have some data on that, so we can start an offline conversation. I think we looked at that when we did some of the analysis, and I don't recall what came out of that. So, but that is probably something I can tell you. I didn't look at that aspect of it for this webinar.
Great. And the second of these 3 questions is, how do you respond to a bid which you know has the wrong code? Can you write a LOE?
So LOE, a letter of interest or letter of intent. So we're going to talk about in a few slides. I think we're definitely going to talk about what recourse you have. I should say that I'm not an attorney, so this is certainly not legal advice, but in a few slides, we're going to get to some of the negative ramifications when there is an incorrect NAICS assignment. And I'm going to touch on that just a little bit and answer that question. So I'm just asking that you bear with me and let me get to that in a slide in a few minutes.
Right. And the third question reads, can this be improved with market research, sources sought, combined with requests for comment and feedback?
I'm going to ask you to clarify that question for me. If you could just be a little bit more specific and maybe rephrase the question, that may help.
Okay, and we'll
And
wait a moment.
Maybe perhaps Jennifer, as I'm presenting the next slide, that individual could just maybe rephrase it a little bit for me. So here's the 4th example, a correct NAICS, but still not quite correct. Okay, and this goes back to the regulation that I read off earlier that says that when there is a supply contract at play, the procurement person must default to the manufacturing of that item, not to the wholesaling of that item or the retailing of that item. And you can look that up. So in this case, and this is a solicitation that's also out, you can find it, pesticide and application, Clay Center, Nebraska. And so the NAICS that was assigned to this one, 325320, pesticide and other agricultural chemical manufacturing. So again, acquisitions for supplies must be classified under the appropriate manufacturing or supply NAICS code, not under a wholesale trade or retail trade NAICS code. So think about it this way. I think the buyer in this case thought about this as primarily a product purchase. And this is something a business partner of mine said to me once, and she's from Tennessee. She may be watching this and she'll have a chuckle someday when she sees the recording. She would say in a Tennessee accent, you could be right and still be wrong. And what I mean by that is, so the person followed the regs, but when you think about it, companies that manufacture pesticides are not companies that have pilots and planes in Nebraska who are going to crop dust in areas where this federal buyer needed some spraying to happen. So in this case, a service NAICS code would have been much more appropriate because the primary activity happening here is spraying of areas, although there is certainly a product involved. So Jennifer, I don't know if you've gotten any clarification on that next question.
Yes, so let me read the original question, which was, couldn't this be improved with market research / sources sought combined with requests for comment and feedback? The clarification is, I guess, what if the government sends out a sources sought requesting feedback on the procurement? This provides an opportunity for the industry to recommend changes to the NAICS code.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I am simply going to agree with you on that point. When there's a sources sought notice, it's pretty open-ended in terms of what people can tell the buyer. And certainly that's an opportunity if you feel that a NAICS code is headed in the wrong direction for a particular opportunity, that is certainly an opportunity to address that before it becomes contentious or controversial. So example number 5, and Jennifer, I know we're close to a half hour here. I have 4 or 5 slides left. I don't know how quickly I should go about this. What is the hard
Take your time.
Take my time?
Take your time.
Okay, great. So the 5th example here, and this is something we wrote about in the articles surrounding this topic, where one NAICS is not sufficient. And this is really an uphill battle. And when I say that, this slide presents an idea that runs counter to the actual regulation. So the regulation says apply one NAICS code. But here we have a title, AFD National Vessel Contract, Relocation, Delivery, Storage, Maintenance, Appraisal, and Disposal Services for seized and/or forfeited vessels for the continental and outside of the continental United States. And so the NAICS code applied here was marinas, 713930s. And no one would really dispute that a marina would certainly have an opportunity to be a bidder for something like this, especially if they have some of the capabilities you see by the color-coded words in the title. But when you really start to peel it back, there are certainly lots of companies that have the ability to relocate a boat. Probably not the driver of that truck, but there's certainly a lot of companies out there that relocate boats or that have the ability to drive boats across the country, but that may not do any of these other things. There may be other companies out there that do appraisals for boats, but they don't do anything else. So this is an example, and this would require a regulatory change, not necessarily one that I'm lobbying for, I'm just pointing it out, where the inherent nature of the solicitation really would require more than one NAICS code to be associated with the opportunity. Because think about it, the government is saying on one hand, you vendors out there, you're allowed to have as many NAICS codes associated with your business in our system as possible, but they're telling their buyers, you must only assign one NAICS code. So anybody who, let's say, does relocation involving boats, and maybe, there's a trucking category that they use for that, they would never find this. And that speaks to a shortfall in this one-to-one relationship where one federal procurement may only have one NAICS code. And I think with that, we can go to the 6th example. Unless there are questions. So in this 6th example, this is what I call the tail wagging the dog. And there's a solicitation out there, Yukon River chum salmon analysis. And this is also something that we touched on in the article that we wrote about. And the article's on MyGovWatch.com under the news section, so you can access that. There's also been a press release. If you Google MyGovWatch, NAICS codes, incorrect assignment, you'll find it. In this case, The opportunity was sole sourced, and it was sole sourced to a Native American government organization, a tribe, a Native American tribe in Alaska. And so the NAICS code assigned to this was 921150, American Indian and Alaska Native tribal governments. So the sole sourcing of the opportunity was perfectly fine. It was completely justifiable. This was a case where this tribal government had the ability to continue doing this work. And I don't know all the regs on sole sourcing, but that part was on the up and up. So what they did was they said, well, this is who is already doing the work. We'll just put the NAICS code of Alaska or American Indian and Alaska Native tribal governments on this. But when you think about it, and that NAICS code, the 921150, that NAICS code is really for organizations, and 92 is the NAICS code for public administration. That NAICS code is for organizations that are government functioning organizations around American Indian tribes and Alaska Native tribal governments. Inherently, studying the population of chum salmon in Alaska would be something more related to scientific analysis, certainly something, you know, in fishery sciences or in biology, but certainly it's not intrinsically a Native American government function. So in this case, they just chose it because who they wanted had that NAICS code. And it's important to know that in order to bid on a solicitation, it is not required for you as the vendor to have that NAICS code on your SAM profile, right? So if you have the past performance, if you have the ability to provide that product or service, or if you have shown and you have the ability to do that work, it's not required that that NAICS code live on your SAM profile, although you can certainly add it. And so that is it with example number 6. So those are the 6 examples I have, Jennifer. And we have just, I guess, 2 more content slides before we get to any questions. And so what are the ramifications of an incorrect NAICS assignment? Well, I came up with 7 of them. So the first one, inaccurate government-wide reporting on spending. So if up to 40% of NAICS codes are not correct on Sam.gov, boy, that really makes it hard to report if you're looking at the department level or even on a government-wide basis. It really makes it hard to know with any accuracy or with reliable accuracy, what is the government actually buying, right? So if you're on usaspending.gov, it would be fundamentally skewed because the data on the back end, the old expression is garbage in, garbage out. If they're not applying the correct NAICS code on the front end, then on the back end, on the reporting side, it's going to be challenging. Second, less visibility opportunity for contractors. And that's where a site like ours comes in, because we're doing things in the background to make sure on our platform that you see the correct leads, even if they get the NAICS code incorrect. But if you're just going to Sam.gov, or if you're, God forbid, using a system where they just say, what's your NAICS code, and then sending you opportunities based on that, you have less visibility and you're going to see fewer things because you're assuming the government buyer is using the correct NAICS code, which is not happening to a large extent. You'll have fewer bidders on opportunities because there's less visibility. And what I'm saying here is all at the macro level. It's not at the individual level. Certainly with lots of individual solicitations, all of the right people are hearing about them. But by and large, over tens of thousands or even millions of solicitations, if these NAICS code assignments are not correct, fewer people will hear about things, and the government may even pay higher prices as a result of that, or get less value for the same spend if the best companies are not always bidding because they're not hearing about things. It affects small business and socioeconomic set-asides. Without going into a lot of detail on this, every NAICS code has a small business size, a standard, and it's either a revenue-based standard or an employee-based standard. So either average annual revenue or the number of employees you have. And if they pick one NAICS code and not the other, then the size standard may be different. And that's where some of the controversy and legal challenges come in. And we're going to get back to that in item number 7 here. So less teaming and subcontracting to meet bundled requirements. So think about it, if fewer people are hearing about opportunities, Or in the boating example with the seizures on the boats in the continental United States and outside, if the person who can move boats across the country or appraise boats is not hearing about the opportunity, then he's never or she's never going to have the opportunity to team or subcontract to or from the marina that may not do the trucking or the appraisals. So there's just less opportunity for partnering when they're not allowing more than one NAICS or when they get it wrong. Reduced efficiency in federal operations. So if they're not putting the right NAICS code on opportunities, then everything just slows down and it just becomes a fundamentally more inefficient process. And then more frequent legal challenges. And this goes back to the question that I promised I would address earlier. So if you believe a NAICS code has been incorrectly assigned to a federal solicitation, then you absolutely have recourse. And the SBA, I believe it's the SBA, will look at these challenges to NAICS codes assignments. And there are federal contracting attorneys out there. The Co-Prince law firm rings a bell. Nick Solosky at Fox Rothschild rings a bell. There are people out there who will help you if you feel that there's a solicitation where the incorrect NAICS code has been assigned. And there are lots of examples out there. People have written about this extensively, where you can challenge that NAICS code assignment. And if it has merit, then they will at least be forced to look at it. I wouldn't do that on my own. I would certainly get a law firm to help with that unless it was cost prohibitive. So those are the ramifications of the government getting the NAICS code incorrect. And we can ignore.
Great. And Nick, it looks like I think you probably answered this question just here with number 7, what you just were saying, but what should a vendor do if they believe they are being disqualified from a bid because the contracting officer assigned an incorrect or questionable NAICS code?
So you need to act, and you need to act early. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm not an attorney, but I think the requirement is you have something like 10 days or 2 weeks from when you know something to when you must protest it. And so whether you call the contracting officer on day 1 or have your corporate counsel or send your own letter on day 1 or day 2, or wait and get an attorney involved and have the attorney just make a nice phone call before sending a letter, you do have a timeline by which you must take action. Otherwise, if you don't do anything by the time after those number of days have elapsed after you learn that information, then you lose your rights in respect of challenging that. So takeaways, what should I do next? So what occurs to me when we did this research, and this is for the people, right, who were in the bucket of companies or people that don't need a commercial bid notification platform. If you're just searching on Sam.gov and you don't care about state and local, or you don't have a lot of things that you sell, I would really study all of the NAICS codes. If you go on the Census Bureau website, there's a file you can pull down and they're all there. And I would start searching that Excel file for different NAICS codes that that might also be adjacent to what you do. So if you're a wholesaler, I would look for the manufacturing NAICS code, and I would look for the retail equivalent, and I would know what those are. You know, if you do temporary help services, I would look for all the generic NAICS codes that might remotely be similar to providing bodies to wave a flag at a parking lot. And I would identify what all of those adjacent NAICS codes are. If you are in the other bucket, the bucket of people who do use a commercial bid notification service, if you're not using our site, I would not sign up for one that uses NAICS codes to drive your experience, because if they're using NAICS codes to drive your experience, this presentation should show you how flawed that may be. I would ask customer service, what are all the ways that your platform attempts to route the correct leads your way, right? Because we're doing things that not everyone's doing. I would ask yourself, does your provider have proactive US-based customer service to make sure the right leads are making it to your inbox? There are a lot of services like ours out there that just want you to sign up, and there really is no relationship beyond that. We have US-based customer support, and we like interacting with users because we have the ability to fine-tune the dials forever to make sure that even if your business changes, you're having visibility to those opportunities. And I would also ask yourself, am I overpaying for marginally relevant leads? So that's what I would do next, depending on whether you're in bucket A, somebody who doesn't really need a commercial service, or bucket B, somebody who should check out our website. And so the last slide we have here is just an extended offer to try MyGovWatch.com. Anyone who starts a free MyGovWatch trial by close of business today will have their trial extended from 14 days to 30 days. That's just something easy we can do in the office. And Jennifer, I believe, added the link to that offer in the chat. So if you click on that and start a trial based on that link, then we will know it, and we will reach out to you and confirm that your trial would end on the 9th of July. So with that, Jennifer, we're out of questions, or I'm out of content, and we can take some questions.
Great presentation, Nick. We do have a question here that says, what are the main differences between MyGovWatch and other providers in the marketplace?
Great question. Thank you for that. So I would say this: MyGovWatch.com is certainly not the oldest kid on the block. We are using sort of the latest and greatest in artificial intelligence. We're not the first using artificial intelligence, but it's like with anything else in technology. Things get old, things people are using change. Because we started using it only a few years ago, it's later generation technology. Cost is one of the main ways that we're competing. We believe that lead data of this nature has been overpriced for years. So it's really cost versus value, right? You're going to see most of the same leads, or almost all of the same leads, actually, and you might even see some that the other guys don't have. So the value proposition of cost versus what you're getting is really the main reason, or one of the main reasons why you would look at us. It's not a faceless purchase, meaning you're signing up for a website, but there's actually people who are going to be responsive if you're looking for something or if you need help. Also, we have a product called Open Recs Access, where we're getting results of opportunities through the open records laws to give you visibility to pricing of your competitors, winning proposals submitted by your competitors, evaluations, so you can see what the government agencies think about your company versus others in the marketplace. So those are the main things that I would say are differentiators as it relates to our website versus some of the others, which are very good websites as well. We just like ours.
Great. And the link has been placed both in the chat as well as in the questions, and we will also email the recording and the slides and the link to everybody by close of business today.
Yeah, and finally, Jennifer, I would say that if you have any trouble with the link, or if you think about it over the weekend, you can send an email to support@mygovwatch.com and just mention this webinar, and we'll get you set up with a 30-day trial as well.
Great. That's all that I believe I have. Nick, is any last parting words?
No, I would just say, Jennifer, thank you so much for allowing us to do this today. And folks, please, if you get a moment, visit mygovwatch.com and check us out. You'll be glad if you do.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll get the recording on the slides and the link to you shortly.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.